Well, hello there. Take a look. Remember I had this United Nations cup? This was designed for, I don't know, homeschool mom that has kids. Some days I feel like I am the United Nations. Okay, so I'm so glad you joined me. Today I'm going to talk to you about using the checklist that I just made, which I'm hoping is an effective, useful tool for you if you are a homeschool mom. It doesn't matter how you're homeschooling. The goal is to have confidence in how you're doing it and not to feel uncertain. To not feel uncertain about your choice. And that's why I've included an entire week of my 4-week retreat with the intention of exploring this, your level of confidence, satisfaction, so that you're not feeling not good enough and uncertain in your homeschool. So I have created a checklist, which why should I show you? I've written all sorts of notes on here. And I brought it out because I want to make sure that you know how to use it. So I'm speaking to Facebook and I'm speaking to Instagram. So I'm going to look back and forth between screens. So you can find this checklist in the link in my bio if you'd like to take a look at it. If you've ever downloaded it before, it's not the same. In fact, it's remarkably different. I've spent a lot of time over the last few years trying to determine how can we deschool, how can we practically deschool, because this is such a very cool word right now, and understandably, but it's kind of nebulous all at the same time. How do we practically deschool in our homeschool? No matter what kind of school or homeschool we have, whether it's unschooling or classical or you fill in the blank. Eclectic if you've been around for more than 5 years. So deschooling your homeschool. Here's my checklist. The first thing that I would suggest to you is to actually invest 1 week in simply observing your child. Now you could be doing this while you're homeschooling. You could be doing this without your formal routine, in whatever form. It could be during the summer, it could be during the winter, it doesn't matter. You're going to create a routine where you are grabbing a journal just for 1 week. You're going to grab a journal and you're going to write each of your kids' names on a different paper inside of your journal. So write their name at the top and then actually write down what it is they're doing. Excuse me. So you're going to write down what they're doing, whether that is watching, I don't know what people watch or little ones watch anymore, but a cartoon of some sort, or an older child is watching anime, whatever it is, write it down. Write down when they ask, Mom, can I write a letter to Grandma? Or, Mom, can you help me figure out how many jelly beans I get to have and my baby sister gets to have the same amount and we can figure out how to divide it up? I want you to write down all the things that they do. Your goal is to observe them and their natural aptitudes and their interests, and I bet you've heard that a few times. So when I talk about their natural aptitudes or interests, sometimes when our kids are specifically young, we're like, I don't know, they like playing Lego. Yeah, write that down. So here's the thing. I think of our kids as a blank canvas, and we don't always get to know who they are when they first enter the world. I don't know if you've carried a baby inside of you and that baby kicked a lot or did a lot of, had a lot of energy at certain times of day, and you've said to yourself, I wonder if they're gonna, have a hard time sleeping through the night, or if they're gonna be really busy. I did follow those things, and we all tend to do that because we wanna know who is this child right in front of us. And the reality is, we don't know, and we don't get to find out right away either, do we? No. And the thing is, eventually, they become a beautiful picture or palette. This is one of my kids' drawings. But in the beginning, we're doing a little painting. We are assuming that we're helping them out a bit. We're facilitating who they are and what they're all about. And so we're helping, giving them resources so that they can do a little coloring. And then we give them other colors or activities or time with us to do certain things or experiences or resources, or surround them with people in their world that like doing similar things that they like to do. And then we keep building in the colors, and we allow them to use different paintbrushes, and then they layer things on and they use different techniques. And gradually, though we began with giving them the resources, they take over the role of painter and they begin to build their palette. They get to develop it because it's their life. And even though theoretically about the age of 18, 19 is considered the age of adulthood in most provinces and states, it's probably around, 11 or somewhere around then when you start to see that the child is asking to paint it themselves, Mom. And sure, they're probably doing that when they're 2, but I mean, really taking ownership of their lives in real subtle ways, or not so subtle, as some kids tend to not be so subtle. Had a few of those. In fact, I had 3 of my 4. So observing their natural interests and natural aptitudes, that's your goal as a homeschool mom. It's not about creating a routine, a perfect routine, just like the school, and making sure there's enough hours in the day and there's enough content and there's enough curriculum and the right philosophy and the right all that. It's about that child, your specific child. This is my youngest child. And right now, that's what, as I said yesterday, we're in the process of trying to find a community for him so he can develop his chess skills, which are pretty good and is not my forte. So we're trying to help him develop his interests and his natural aptitudes. And since he's the 4th of 4 kids, I've learned that just because he loves chess now doesn't mean that he's going to become a grandmaster eventually. It does not necessarily mean that he's going to pursue that for the rest of his life. Maybe. They do all have their interests and they show them fairly young. But I know that my child who talked about going into medicine her entire childhood, because her dad is also a physician and she's very academic, very hard worker, a very smart kid, she decided to go into ballet, into a fine arts degree. And maybe she'll still do medicine. Who knows? But at this point, we were surprised too that maybe who we think they are in the beginning is, this is that gal, is not necessarily who you think they're going to be. Now this other little gal in a very similar dress and the very ginormous smile, this girlfriend, she got so much energy, so much enthusiasm, has always been happy and just big personality. Has a remarkable YouTube following. No surprise to me at all. Huge following. I've tried for years to do things on YouTube, and this girlfriend can actually put a video together just about how she's not coming back to YouTube and get 20,000 followers or 20,000 views. Just, because that's what you do when you're 13, I guess. But this girl has a lot of personality. Is she going to go into acting school? I wonder. Maybe. Whatever their passions are right now, the key isn't so much about figuring out what they should do for the rest of their life, but what they should do right now. So watch their aptitudes and watch their interests right now, because they're a blank canvas and you are helping facilitate them creating their beautiful portrait or picture. Observe what lights them up. This is kind of easy to do, and sometimes it's an effort. There was a mom that once told me that the reason she wouldn't unschool is because it was too much work, which I thought that is a very wise observation. Her approach with her 6 kids was to have a formal approach in the morning to do her activities that she wanted to do with her kids. And she thought it was way too much work to do the unschooling thing, which meant she was watching what lit them up and went to the library or went to a bookstore or found a resource person to help that child for that interest right now. And it was just too much going on for her, which totally fine. If it worked for her, that's the key, is it working for you, then great. But a great observation, because unschooling and self-directed learning, child-directed learning, what other words do we use to describe that general methodology? Well, we often think that that's the easy way out, but it's actually not. It's not. But we want to watch what lights them up, because in the end of their days, when, say, they get to be a ripe old 96, they are going to look back at their lives and say to themselves, I'm so glad that mom put me in front of a whole bunch of workbooks and created a routine for me when I was between the ages of 6 and 17. I'm so glad they did that. She did that for me. Or I'm so glad that she helped me follow my interests or follow my passions, or really paid attention to who I was so that I could continue to develop who I am and figure that out throughout my life, that that's the goal, is actually to follow my passions and my interests and fully live my life. So the next thought that I have on the checklist is about observing how they prefer to learn. There are many really interesting quizzes online that you can find on learning how to learn and learning how your child specifically learns. And we can benefit from those just like we can benefit from personality profiling systems like Enneagram or Myers-Briggs or DISC or the Colors one, or you name it. There's so many of them. And I don't think any of these are definitive. I think we can grow and change and learn and evolve over time, but we can learn a lot from these systems. They help us to understand ourselves in how we're relating with our kids, and it helps us to understand our kids, also how they interact with each other as well. So it's useful for us to understand how they prefer to learn. You could just ask them, or you could do the very first thing that I suggested, is to actually observe them. Some of my kids really preferred to just sit on their beds and read the book or do whatever activity they were doing independently. And some of them preferred doing it alongside me or another sibling, and it didn't really matter who it was, but they wanted some sort of interaction with whatever work or learning they were doing. And so sometimes there's a social element to learning, and sometimes that's why it's actually useful if you can get them into an apprenticeship when they're at a certain age, when they really love doing something, and somebody else that really knows how to do that would be a great resource for them. Introducing them to another person might be really useful, or sometimes when they get into the older high school years, there's always college courses. You can get into a college course just to experience the classroom experience. Of course, there's things that are virtual, which you probably are very familiar with, like OutSchool and all sorts of different platforms for classes. But really building community sometimes is an important thing, whether it's building your own homeschool co-op or inviting a few friends to do a field trip with you and your children so that your kids feel like they're learning alongside other people. And then also recognizing that how you like to learn and how your child likes to learn might not be the same. Sometimes they are. But it's really useful for you to do a little check on yourself and say, how do I like to learn? Because you will default that direction. If you're somebody that was young and you liked to pretend to be the teacher, and you got out all your friends in the neighborhood so they could sit in front of you, and you had your chalkboard and you explained how to do certain things on the chalkboard, you're probably considered a traditional learner and possibly a visual learner, but you're approaching it in a very traditional way. Do your kids like doing it in a traditional way? And of course, vice versa. There's all different sorts of ways to learn though. So I recommend checking a few books. I've got this on my Homeschool Mama reading list. Checking a few books to learn more about how we learn. It is very, very helpful for us to understand how the brain works. So I would recommend to you Judy Arnall, Arnall. She's the author of Unschooling to University, but she's also the author of many other books, one of them about growth and development for kids. There is one by Barbara Coloroso, is it Learning How to Learn? Also, Raising Critical Thinkers just came out. Julie Bogart, really great resource. There's a lot of practical activities in there that actually help you and your child learn, no matter what their age. The other thing I would say is to observe how they're relating, how they're engaging their siblings and you and their friends. It'll help you also how you want to approach their learning activities. It really helps you to process relationship, or help them understand a little bit more about relationship, because we hear all the time about how the most important thing in homeschool is relationship, and it is. Also, to practically pull away yourself from the relationship, or pull away yourself from being in the thick of it, and really observing how you're relating, or how your child is relating to the other one. What is their default? There is an element of learning, just pure relationship learning, that is naturally caught in our homeschool worlds. It happens over the course of time. It's funny to me that people ask about socialization, because really they're definitely socialized, but they will reap all the benefits of all the negatives and the positives about who we are as people. So they're learning from us naturally, but we can help both do a lot of our own inner work in relationships, so that we can show them how to do it, but also practically have conversations with them about how they're engaging those relationships. So assessing your relationship with your child is the next thing that I have on the checklist, because they're learning this with or without you saying anything out loud. They are learning so much. And because I've seen and noticed, and a few years ago, there was a big debate about, this is probably a decade ago when I was doing psychology classes. So there was a debate about which is more impactful: nurture, the relationship, the attachment, the connection between the parent and the child, or nature, how you're born and how you come into the world. Which one has more impact on your life experience or your relationships? I'm curious what you think. Put your comments in the section down, or the comment section down below, because I don't have a fixed notion about it. I used to think that it was entirely nurture, and now that I've had kids, my oldest is almost 21, my youngest is 13 now, and I've got 4. I don't think of it as they just are nurtured. They are very different people coming into the world. I can't directly translate how many times they kicked and how active they were after they were actually born into the world, but I did notice some very strong traits right from the get-go in all of them. And that is the nature element, that they just come into the world a certain way, they relate naturally a certain way, they see the world a certain way, they come into the world in a certain way, so they receive all the relational things differently. So I'm curious what you think. Nature versus nurture, which one is more impactful? Nonetheless, relationship with you or relationship with their siblings or friends has a huge impact on how they learn and how they absorb things in their world, or how they connect the dots about stories in their world. I also add to observe how your child deals with boredom. Okay, so I'm the mom that I don't say these words. When a child had said to me, "Mom, I'm bored," I'm not actually saying, "Hey, do you want to clean something?" Because we do that on Saturdays anyway. Also, because I just go more philosophical. Are you surprised? I do something like, "Oh, cool. That's so cool. You're bored." That means like you kind of come to the end of your discovery in all these different areas, and now you get to find something new and discover something new in the world, and now you can go explore something else. I go like that, and I believe that. I don't think our culture gives kids or anybody enough time to think, enough time to be quiet, enough time to process all the stuff that's going on. And it's really a highly underrated benefit of homeschooling. Almost routinely, every year, my most popular post on my website is about inspiring words from Maya Angelou. The most popular, I think, because people identify this concept of solitude as being really important, but we're all not sold on the concept of solitude, of actually being quiet and actually being allowed to just think, not scheduling in our days with tons of activities, which is so tempting as a homeschool mom to assume that more activities is better. Reality check, less really is more. So then what do you do about boredom, and how do you help your child deal with boredom? Make sure you write it down. Observe it, but write it down in that journal. Exactly what does your child do when they're bored? And if your answer is, it's a screen, that's okay. Write it down. Also, if you're of the persuasion like I am to not allow children to have screens all the time, write it down. What do they do when they're not having screens? So I'm not going to convince you one way or the other. You have your opinion on that, so I'm not even going to go there. But I will say that because my kids don't have screen time all the time, or they haven't had throughout their childhood, they do other stuff. Also, there's amazing stuff on screens, which I'll talk a little bit about toward the end. Okay, so observe how your child deals with boredom. Determine what you think, and this is probably the most important, maybe the second most important tip in my checklist. Determine what you think an education is anyway. If you've been around here for a while, or you've heard me on my podcast, you've probably heard me share that the Latin root for the word education is educato, which means to raise up. And I always want to ask, to raise up what? What are we raising up when we're educating someone? A school system. A school of kids? A classroom of kids? No, we're raising up our children. So how are we going to raise them up? What are we going to do to help raise them up? Usually, the first thing that I hear people say that they want to include in an education, or they want as part of the concept of education in their homeschool, is life skills, which I understand, especially when you come from a school system that is definitely not teaching your kids how to balance checkbooks. Do we have checkbooks anymore? Yeah, well, we do, but does everybody else? Anyways, to manage their finances, or to do the laundry, or to know how to use an axe, or build a fire, or you fill in the blank. And I think all of those things are very valuable, and I think the reason why we naturally value them so much is because they're not taught. They're not things that the school system typically engages. And so they are the most important. But if you were to just enable your children to have an education filled with life skills, would they know what happened in the last few decades in Europe? Would they know what the Dominion of Canada, or the origins of Canada were, or learn about the Constitution in the United States? Would they learn about that? Would you want them to learn about that? Would you want them to learn basic arithmetic, or know how to tip, which means they know percentages at a restaurant? Or would you like them to learn how to, I had a few ideas, but one of them probably I shouldn't speak to right now. But there are so many different possible practical things that we want our kids to know, but there's also some very academic things that we actually really do want our kids to know that. Especially if you have a background in something specific and your partner has something that's a specific area of focus, they are naturally going to learn that. And you probably think that that thing is really important for your kids to know. So it's not just the life skills that you get to decide, these are the things that I want my child to know. Maybe you really want your child to know all about climate control or climate change, or maybe you really want them to learn about what democracy is anyway. That's a discussion point constantly in our home. It always has been, by the way. I think it's a hot topic for a really good reason right now, but it's always been in my home, so much so that my husband is running as member of parliament, an independent member of parliament, and is creating his platform for the intention of asking the question, what is democracy, and are we really doing it? So you get to decide what's the most important stuff that you want to include in your homeschool. What do you want your children to know? I ask you to explore the gaps in your education. We all have gaps. As I said earlier this week, it's not just homeschooled kids that have gaps. Everyone has gaps for many different reasons. One, the most very important reason that we have gaps in knowledge or in educational things is because we are not God. We don't know everything. No one does. No one knows everything. Not Wikipedia, not Google. Nobody knows everything. And then we have to ask, how valuable is it for us to make sure that the goal of our kids' education is to have no gaps, or also to know everything? What's the purpose in that? What were your gaps in your school or in your education? Did you survive despite them? Determine what you most want for your child. If you can look at the long game and ask yourself, okay, so they're 96 and they're looking back on their life. What is it that you're hoping that they'll be able to do? Or they'll be able to say, I did this in my life. What is it you're hoping? And it's a very meta question, but I think it's a really useful one, because oftentimes the end goal of education is to get them graduated and to make sure that they can get into a college. Maybe that's not your specific goal, but it is a common goal. And I think you would agree with me that that's a cultural statement. And I would say, is that the goal? I don't think that's the goal. I think ultimately the goal is to have life purpose and meaning, and also to be able to feed ourselves and create experiences for ourselves or other people, to contribute to society, to do good things for other people. And you could probably add in a few things there too. But the bigger thing is, what's the long goal? What's the end game? Is it just to make sure that they finished figuring out the geometry program before they got out of grade 11 or their junior year? Is that the goal? So you get to figure out what's the end goal. And that, of course, assumes, and this is why I talk about this in the retreat, that assumes that you're also figuring out what's your goal. Because they aren't going, at least not in your home, not under your roof. They will not be learning how to live their lives on purpose beyond what you are able to guide them in. Also, you get to have a life where you live it on purpose too. So you get to determine what you want most for you. This is a comment that could probably be brought up right at the very beginning, but I wanted to share about the other things first to get you really thinking about this education concept and how to actually understand how you can take yourself out of a conventional schooled mindset. And yet, the most important part of your entire homeschool is how clean your floor is. No, it's not. Don't look at my floor. Oh wait, you can't, for a reason. No, the most important part is your child. It is. I have yet to decide what we call this. Should we call it self-directed learning, child-led learning, unschooling? What do we call this? Or just child-focused learning or project-based learning? I don't care what it's called. It doesn't mean anything. Ultimately, I think there's three people. Their creator, how they connect with their creator, how it influences who your child is. It's about your child and about your child learning. But also, you have been put in your child's life so that you could be part of their life and influence them and have an effect on them. And all of your stories, all of your expertise, all of your abilities, all of your challenges that you're trying to overcome, all of that is part of their education and them and their interests and who they're becoming and how they are being facilitated to paint on their canvases. All of that means that probably, no matter what we call it or decide to call it, they are the main focus of the education. And the last three things I want to encourage you to think about. My son had said this after I had listened to a podcast by Homeschool Unrefined. Love listening to those gals. My son had said the day after I'd listened to a podcast about these two full-grown homeschool moms say the exact same thing. He said, YouTube is as much of an education as any book. Now, I want you to know, by the way, this is a kiddo that reads a lot of books, and he reads some very heavy books, and he's a very, very smart kid. But YouTube is as much of an education. Things that you can experience online, whether they're games or whether it's, documentaries, or being able to create, enable these platforms of social opportunities or OutSchool. You name the platform, you name the thing that's out there on this screen, on my iPad or on my computer, and those are all educational. It's all educational. Also, assume that the experiences that we have, like traveling, or even if we don't have the capacity to travel and we just head to a new town and we check out their museum, or we have a coffee and chat with somebody entirely out of our town or our community, those experiences are learning. As I said yesterday, there was a conversation that I had when we were in rural Ghana. We were there with our 4 kids. My husband was volunteering at a hospital, and my kids would go with him each day. One of the kids would go with him into the OR, which you cannot do here. They would go into the OR, they'd be fully garbed, scrubbed in, ready to watch Dad. So he was an anesthetist, or he is an anesthetist. And so he was helping all sorts of surgeries. So there was one open abdominal surgery, there were less invasive surgeries, but there were like surgeries across the spectrum. And my kids, aged 3 to about 11 or so, got to be part of that every day. They did pediatric rounds with their dad when we were in rural Ghana. They got to do so many things in the hospital. We got to go on a field trip to a school, which took us about an hour drive on the edge of the mountain, almost fell off the mountain. That's how raggedy the road was. But we got all the way to that school, and 300 kids greeted us with songs, and they were just lovely, a lovely community, a new school, and Fanta drinks, like soft drinks, and just a very welcoming environment. And my kids got to spend the day at school in rural Africa. And someone asked me, but did you bring the studies? Did you bring books or curriculum? No, I didn't. And I brought flashcards. I brought math flashcards just as I don't know why, because I thought we'd do something educational. It turns out we had lots to do. There were so many things to do. Every time we went to the market, every time we went to a church, which would last 4 hours, or every time we would go to anybody's home, there was always an education in every place we went. It was a remarkable experience, an educational experience. And the last thing that I know that we can do, especially I know this as a seasoned homeschool mom, because I didn't get this right off the top. Every time we have a conversation with our kids, like a deep conversation, or a conversation about something in the news, or something that's meaningful, whether it's to that child or to you, a meaningful conversation about literally anything, those are very impactful moments of education in your homeschool. In fact, is there anything bigger because you're not only having this giant influence on this human's life to process their life and process what they're seeing around their world, but you're giving them everything that you've had from the very beginning, from when you first entered the world, all the things that you've learned, all the things that you've seen. You're offering that to them, and they are processing based on who they are and how they came into the world. They're building that relationship, that a connection with you, that attachment to you, so that they feel secure, so that they feel like they can engage their world, whether it's adults or children. There's nothing like a really good conversation. I remember probably in the first couple months of homeschooling, sitting around the table at dinner time, and all 4 of our little kids, and it was chaos, as it is in the beginning years. And I remember sitting around that table and thinking, there's too much noise. Everybody needs to stop talking. No more questions. Like, don't ask any questions. I just want quiet. And then I just went, light bulb on. They're asking questions. I am a homeschool mom. It's not an option. In fact, I would suggest it's not an option whether you are a mom or a homeschool mom or not. But I definitely felt a sense of responsibility that this conversation is happening right now, and we're going to have this chat right now, or schedule it for later. But those conversations are powerful. Add in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on any of these topics or these different tools or reflective journaling exercises that you especially find useful or meaningful, or things that you'd like to try in your homeschool. Because I would like to hear from you, whether you're live or whether you're watching this later. I'd like to hear what are the most impactful things that you can include to deschool your homeschool. And if you want to find that checklist, you can check it out in the link in my bio up above on Instagram. And if you can't find it in the guides, in the Facebook group, Homeschool Mama Support Group, ask me and I will send you a link. Thanks for hanging out. We'll talk to you soon.